Hello, and welcome back to VoxPopcast, the weekly pseudo-academic roundtable of pop culture analysis with drinking and swearing. My name is Christopher Maverick, and I am once again here with Katya and Hannah, and I'm not going to say how's it going, guys. It's been a week. This is going to be a weird show.
Yeah, we're recording this on, let's see, January 8th, if I have my timeline correct.
January 9th.
January 9th. It's been a week, guys. I don't even know what day it is anymore. And I'm actually staring at a calendar right now, and I don't know what day
It's the 9th. I have my
It's the 9th, guys. It's been a lot.
Saturday.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Hold on. I invited Steph to
Yeah, thanks for letting me sit in on this. I was very curious about the discussion, so I kind of invited myself.
We should let people... Okay.
You are always welcome, Steph. So, Mav, what the hell has happened this week?
Well, okay, so here's a weird thing. Now, most of our shows, we try to have, a topic, and we're mostly evergreen. Most of our episodes are, you listen to them whenever you listen to them. They're always about some pop culture thing. Maybe it's a movie that just came out, but, you can watch it whenever, you can pick up it whenever. But then we had a lot of discussions this week about, did we want to cover the last week in American politics? Because this is as much culture as you're going to get. And it's just been on our minds. And today's show, today for the listener, if you were listening to the show when it came out, is Monday. This was scheduled to be our box office draft show, which we've already recorded. But then we were like, oh, God.
Yeah, it just felt a little like...
we didn't want to talk about Black Widow and Eternals and stuff.
Yeah.
At a moment where the entire country's in turmoil, and while we're not a serious news show, it just felt not, especially because it's an episode we recorded before the events of this week. It just didn't, I think it just didn't feel right to us.
Right.
And there's a lot going on that intersects with pop culture, American cultural history,
right,
technology, all of the things. Every shoe in culture feels like it's dropped this week.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we always say that culture and politics are intertwined and you can't separate them.
Yeah, so that's going to be the show. I just want to point out the last show that actually has come out as we record this, and not the last one we recorded, but the last one the listeners have heard. There's a point on it where Katya, you go, okay, I don't know what's happening in American politics right now because we recorded it 3 weeks earlier. But call your congressman. I'm sure you say at some point, something crazy is going on. You should probably be calling your congressman now. I was listening back to that and I'm like, okay, it's Katya's fault. She cursed the future, I guess.
But I feel like for reasons we're about to talk about in the sort of more immediate term, but I feel first of all, you should always be calling your Congress representatives.
Just daily.
There's almost always something, even on a minor scale. You could be like, hey, do this better. I feel like in the last 4 years, a lot of people have flexed that skill who maybe haven't flexed it before. So, yay. I feel like in the last week, that has felt even more.
Okay. So for posterity, because this is, again, we are recording in the midst of history unraveling, and I should have said unfolding, but no, I'm going to stick with unraveling.
Yeah.
So we're recording in the midst of all of this. We had to talk about whether we wanted to even do this show or not, because we're like, well, we're just going to be talking about our feelings about what's happening, and we're recording on a Saturday. The show comes out on a Monday. I'm not sure the country will be here by then. I'm not sure what's going to be on. So how outdated could we be? This is going to be weird, but we should let people know where we are in history as we record at this.
So in 4 years from now, people can
listen and go.
So future cultural researchers of the world, you're welcome.
Right.
So actually back to last Saturday.
We'll do a recap timeline of at least big picture things.
Yeah, everybody get out your whiteboard.
And with the caveat that, to borrow from the NPR Politics podcast, things will certainly have changed by the time you hear this.
So last Saturday, Trump had an hour-long phone call with the Georgia Secretary of State asking, quote, I just want to find 11,780 votes. So on Sunday, the Washington Post obtained the recording of that conversation, and we found out that Trump was pressuring and threatening and harassing the Georgia Secretary of State. So that was just Saturday to Sunday.
So 6 days ago, our time, as we record, Trump committed yet another impeachable offense. Is what you're saying?
He was effectively trying to radically alter election
Right.
result.
So that should be enough to do not only this show on that should be an event that drives all of media for the next week. That was 6 days ago.
However, that has largely, I won't say disappeared from the news, but is a minor blip.
Yes. Okay.
Big picture is Trump is trying to steal the election.
Right. That was 6 days ago. Yes.
Yes.
So Hannah, please continue.
In the midst of all of this, the pandemic is raging. People are preparing to go back to school, either virtually or in person. Vaccine distribution is not going well in many places. And this past week, for the listener, is also the first time we had 4,000 deaths in one day in the U.S.
So I guess Tuesday was what was a big day because we had the Georgia Senate runoff and the Democrats squeaked out wins in both of those.
Yay.
So the Democrats took control of the Senate, which should have driven the entire news cycle for the week and been the biggest story in the world in the United States of America.
Can we pause?
However, yes.
Pause. So, when you talk about Stacey Abrams and the other Georgia organizers who pulled that off for a second, because that's amazing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. She's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that should have been the big story.
Yeah.
One more little asterisk. If you would like to see more change like this, you should find places in your state that are organizing, and you should invest in your communities, not just during presidential elections, but every election, because it turns out local races really matter and voter registration matters. Anyway, so that was Tuesday.
I'm crazy, so I got to watch the returns because this is the Super Bowl. So I'm sitting there going, oh my God, and just watching numbers tick in. And then I finally go to bed around 4 or 5 in the morning on Wednesday, content that
the world is okay.
Yeah,
Or at least
the Georgia
on track to somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a 50-50 margin with a one tiebreaker. Some senators of whom I don't, even though they might be Democrats, I don't necessarily agree with on a lot of things. But the world was markedly better when Wednesday morning from about 4 a.m. till about noon.
Yeah.
So around 1 o'clock, I believe they started at 1. They started the official counting of the vote, 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time.
And when we say counting of the vote, we're specifically referring to a particular actual mostly symbolic ceremony of counting the electoral college votes.
Right, which typically takes, depending on how it goes, somewhere between half an hour and 45 minutes.
It's often a very minor news event. It's it's televised because it's required to be public.
Right. It's televised generally on C-SPAN. It's not usually covered on major news networks.
Right.
So before the county electoral vote, Donald Trump, who is somehow the actual president of the United States, held a rally. Basically, he's been pressuring Mike Pence, who is the vice president of the United States of America, to reject the electoral college vote. Something Mike Pence has repeatedly told Donald Trump, I cannot do. Not that he won't do, he can't. He can't in the same way that he can't flap his arms and fly. It's just not an ability he has. It's not something, there's no law, there's no provision, there's no reason the vice president has that ability. Because of the way the Constitution's written and the ceremonial nature of the county electoral college vote, it is the job of the vice president to essentially open the envelope and then hand them over to the Senate. It's just, there's a weird process. They read the envelope and then they count the votes. He doesn't make decisions. He's just there to literally.
He's presiding.
Right. It's the kind of job you give a 2-year-old at Thanksgiving dinner. You're like,
because it's a ceremonial signaling of basically the essentially the conclusion of the election, even though like at this point, by the time this count is taking place, essentially it is a foregone conclusion. This is not like, it is formally ratifying in this, that in this case, Biden won. Mm-hmm. But like, it's not really up for debate by the time this happens, except for there are objections, as we're all aware from the news. I'm not going to go super into depth to that process. Mm-hmm. But basically, like everyone knows that coming out of that process, objections notwithstanding, like Biden is president. Like this is a formality, and it's it's a symbolic thing. It's like this is a tradition going back to like the founding of the country. It's how we do things. Archaic wooden boxes and paper ballots and all.
Right. But Trump's theory was, well, if he never does it, then I stay president forever. That was like kind of where he was going with it. And Pence basically kept explaining to him, no, it doesn't work like that. So Trump held a rally at 1 p.m. on Wednesday. We're gonna link a timeline in the show notes. but he holds a rally essentially saying that, if Mike Pence does the right thing, we, because he does this in the royal terms, are going to win this election. And his people cheer. And if not, we are going to march on the Capitol. I'll be there with you. And then there's a lot of very vitriolic rhetoric from Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump Jr.,
using war terminology.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm trying to find the actual transcript.
Yeah. He calls
at one point he says, like, you'll never take our country back. Or like, you will never take back our country with weakness. And he's basically urging.
He's urging the trial by combat.
Right. He's urging the mob, like what is essentially a mob at this point, to march from where the address is taking, which is called the Ellipse, which is in front of the White House, to the U.S. Capitol. To essentially be outside while they're counting.
How far is that, Steph? You lived in DC. It's a mile and a half.
Oh, decent distance. I've never done that because it's not that. Oh, maybe I have. It's a little something like that. I don't know.
But it's easily walkable. I mean, it's
it's a little bit of I believe it's about a mile or a little bit over that. Like it's walkable.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's essentially encouraging them to march to the Capitol to basically be there to exert pressure while they are ratifying this electoral vote. And part of that is like A, this pressure on Pence, and then B, encouraging more representatives to object to the Electoral College votes themselves.
So the way Electoral College objections work, and the mainstream media is kind of making this out like they're very rare. They're not. It actually happens quite frequently, and I'm going to borrow the term on both sides. The Democrats actually object to them a lot as well. In the House, senators are usually much more resilient, and the reason is because since the lower house, House of Representatives, they represent far fewer people than the senators do. You might represent a district that is very, very strongly Democrat or very, very strongly Republican. So a lot of times there are members of the House of Representatives that will object to the count. The presiding officer, the vice president, says, "Is the objection signed by a senator?" And the House guy will go, "No." And then the vice president gets to say, "All right, then it doesn't count. Moving on." This is the job of the vice president. It has
to be sponsored by a member in each house, in each chamber, excuse me, for it to move forward.
And this happened 4 years ago as well. Joe Biden presiding over the count. There were several objections to various states by Democratic members of the House. And Joe was not having it, even though he would have preferred that Hillary Clinton won the election. And he's like, "Nope, doesn't count." And at one point, he even says, "Stop it, it's over." Famously, while he was there.
Because again, this is like even the objections themselves. Like this is a largely symbolic ceremony. Even the objections themselves are largely like kind of the electoral version of virtue signaling to their base. It's like a thing that they can do to say like, "Oh, look, I stood up for your, I did a symbolic, not actually meaningful thing to stand up for XYZ that they can take home."
So very early in the count, Arizona has an objection from both a House member and a Senate member. So
like roughly 15 minutes into the process, actually.
Yes. So that forces mandatory debate of 2 hours in each house, debate on the issue. So the House and the Senate split back up. They walk back to their own chambers and they get to debate for 2 hours whether or not to uphold this objection. They're not going to, because there just was not the stomach for it. They have no grounds for it, but they were just going to force it.
Remind me, you've probably looked at this more recently. I believe it's a simple majority in each chamber.
It is a simple majority in each chamber in order to do it. So the votes were not there in either chamber because even though the Republicans control the Senate, there were only, at this point, there are 13 Republican senators who are for this. So essentially, it's 13 to 87 in the Senate against doing this. And they know this ahead of time. And it was 13 to 86 because there was one person missing, but 13 to 86 in the Senate. And it's 140 to 300 something in the House, against this. So this is going nowhere and everyone knows it.
And this was actually expected. Like this had been reported in the news, people who follow politics were aware, like, okay, here are the people who are probably likely to object. Here are the states that are going to be objected to, like it's Arizona, Pennsylvania. Like that part was expected.
Right. So we knew that a process that was supposed to take 45 minutes because of the 6 objections was going to take about 13 hours. We knew that. And that's the only reason it was being televised on networks that were not C-SPAN, because they're like, oh God, we're going to watch this farce. But I guess that's what we're doing today.
To rewind a little bit to Monday and Tuesday, like there were earlier news reports from multiple outlets basically talking about like, hey, there is risk of things going sideways because they're monitoring far right-wing forums, social media outlets, whatever secret, smoke signal, shaman abilities to predict the future that journalists, I assume, have. To basically be like, hey, this might be weird. So I'm sure also a lot of the impetus to cover this more than regular is like, this is not a usual election. This is not a usual time in American history, which turned out to be prescient because while basically objections are being processed and the Congress has moved into debate, the mob of Trump supporters is moving from the ellipse to the Capitol building, which is getting increasingly riotous, volatile. Let's go like that's kind of underselling it. And so basically the Trump speech starts at a little bit after 1 p.m. By a little bit after 2 p.m., the Trump supporters have not only reached the Capitol building, they have breached the initial steps on the east side of the Capitol building. And roughly 15 minutes later, you have the first rioters that have broken inside the actual building, which is something that has not happened since the War of like 1812. So this is not unprecedented, but basically has not happened in modern American history, is a big deal.
And it goes on all fucking day. It just they kept calling in the National Guard. The National Guard for DC takes approval from the Commander-in-Chief of the DOD, who is currently Donald Trump. So that didn't happen for a while. He claims he sent them right away. That's clearly not true.
Yeah, some states were actually calling them saying, do you want our National Guard to come in?
Yeah, well, they did. Maryland and Virginia eventually just sent their National Guard. They're like, no, you guys need help. But and then finally DC sent their National Guard. But anyway, it gets bloody and dangerous. Congress is forced to abandon chambers and shelter in place. And the United States Capitol is suddenly under siege by an angry mob, which is, not a good thing. This is how civil wars start. So,
yeah, we won't go into like super point by point detail what the response is. Suffice to say, we'll probably refer back to it throughout this episode, but suffice to say, Trump basically issues several kind of like
lukewarm.
Yeah, that's the nice way to put it. I was gonna go with more swear words, but lukewarm. We'll go with that. Attempts to calm the mob, and I put "calm" in heavy air quotes because there's also points like he refers to the rioters as special, as special people.
You're special people. We love you. Yes,
right. Like, he the only points where he really condemns like the actions are when it seems like he's being put under heavy pressure.
He usually condemns them by comparing them to, you don't want to be like those people. There's a few of those.
Yeah, well, it still used inciting rhetoric, even in his like, messages to them, saying, "Oh, we understand." Basically, how I read it is like, we understand that this election is being stolen from you, my people, but try to be nice.
Yeah, it was very reminiscent of like the language we heard around Charlottesville of sort of like, oh, there are fine people on both sides, kind of garbage.
Yes.
It seemed like he tried to incite them further.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So that goes on for the better part of the day. And then eventually late at night.
So so it was the tear gas that actually helped to disperse people and clear out the Capitol building?
Time. I mean, it's also just like, there were, from what I can tell, it's like there's a lot of techniques deployed simultaneously, like moving barricades. Because I mean, you see this pretty common technique of like dispersing protests, and this is true of like most police forces, particularly, when they're not being problematic. See our police brutality episode, and I'll leave it at that for now. Tear gas, mace, also just like simply moving people. Like one of the things we saw deployed, which I believe they also used at Black Lives Matter protests, both at the Capitol and elsewhere, is basically using like metal barricades to just like slowly push people
Mm-hmm.
And in DC also, I'm not sure exactly what time it was declared. It was pretty early on, I believe, but they declared a curfew, I believe, starting at 6 p.m. Mm-hmm. And that's when you really start seeing, I think, the most dispersal of people after that curfew was declared.
Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, while all this is happening, Congress is sheltering in place, and the rioters, insurgents, whatever you want to call them, not protesters, because at this point we've kind of moved beyond into, they have invaded a seat of government, are live streaming this. People are taking photos of themselves defiling the offices of Congress and, sort of blatantly posting them to social media. So they finally get everybody out, and around 8 or 9, Congress announces that no, we are doing this today. There's messages from both Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell saying, nope, we're finishing this today.
Which I applauded. That was awesome.
Both of them. And they came back late at night.
And Chuck Schumer apparently really pushed that too.
Yeah. Well, I'm from several Congress people. I'm mentioning the two of them because they're the two chamber leaders. Mm-hmm. But they came back late at night, and they rushed through the count. Most of the objections from the senators were withdrawn, with the exceptions of the objections from Ted Cruz and
Holly
and Josh Hawley.
And of course, there are a couple of senators who vote with them.
Yes, who vote with them, but they dropped their actual objection, and they
just wanted to get the hell out of there. They just
wanted to get out, so they had to do one more actual 2-hour debate over the state of Pennsylvania because Hawley refused to pull his objection. But even then, the Senate refused to debate it. So they're like, "Yeah, we'll do a 2-hour debate." And they're like, and they walked into the Senate chambers, and Mitch McConnell said, "Anybody have anything to say?" "Nope." "All right, bye." So we'll be back in 2 hours. Because he's like, "You can't make us talk. We're not going to do this. You can't make us talk about it. You can just make us stop and sit here for 2 hours." So,
well, because at that point, like when you think about it in just like practical terms, you're asking them to debate something that just materially contributed to a threat against their lives. Because it's like not saying that like this particular objection or even this particular vote over the Electoral College was the thing that incited the mob, but like part of the reason they're pushing through this is not just like a symbolic like yay America. It's also because like if this doesn't get done, you're basically like inciting the mob to be like, oh look, you succeeded in the thing you set out to do.
Right.
Therefore, this is going to make you potentially more motivated to do the next thing. And the thing you just did put everyone in those chambers' lives at risk. I mean, 4 people died.
5.
5 now?
Not clear. There's at least 5, we know.
Okay. The last report I saw was 4 confirmed. But regardless, even day of, we knew that there was at least one death of a woman who was storming the Capitol who was shot by Capitol Police. So like even at the point I believe the vote's taking place, they're already aware of at least one fatality.
Yes.
Yeah. So on a good note, though, I was thinking that it did kind of backfire for them in that not only did they go on with the process, but they actually like their protest for it were like diminished and it went more smoothly and more positively.
Yeah, it
ended around like 3:45 a.m.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's awful and weird, but we get through it and everybody goes home. And one would hope that would have been the end of all of this, but it wasn't because now we're at Thursday.
Well, a lot of things have been happening at once.
Right.
So Trump originally got suspended from Twitter for 12 hours. And now, as of our recording this, he's gone. And he tried to post using the he's like tried to post using the POTUS account because he usually tweets from he used to tweet from @RealDonaldTrump. And Twitter took that down real fast and was like, "Nope, buddy, you're done."
They said basically he's breached their glorification of violence policy.
Yes,
which I wasn't able in my my research as things have been moving rapidly. I'm not sure when that specific policy was created.
It's been there for a while. At least since Charlottesville.
Right, but I'm saying I was about to say that is something that I believe was at the very least made more robust during the Trump presidency as a direct result.
Yes, of his actions.
The kinds of things that we've been seeing during the last 4 years.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that part of the reason why Trump has his lifetime ban is because Twitter is very concerned that other similar events are going to be planned across social media, which which has already been documented on
various both mainstream and fringe social media platforms.
Right. So,
so this is where we're at.
Right. And that's skip. You said we're not a news outlet. We skipped a bunch of stuff,
Yeah, we skipped a bunch of stuff.
Like, he apparently during the riots, Trump was calling. This is my favorite thing. During the riots, he called down to senators and was trying to get them to, okay, we can use this. This is what I want you to do. And he called the wrong one. He called Mike Lee, who's a Republican senator, meaning to call Tuberville, who's another Republican senator. And Lee is like, Mr. President. And he's like, oh, is this Tuberville? And he's like, no, this is Lee. And he goes, well, can you give Tuberville the phone? So he gives him his personal cell phone. And then they're moving him around. And Lee's like, can I have my phone back?
He needs to evacuate.
Lockdowns during an active...
Right.
Putting more people's lives.
Right. And this conversation is not, are you okay? This conversation is like, how can we use this to make me still president? So,
speaking of bad and thoughtless things that happened during the lockdown, Ted Cruz sent out a fundraising message.
Yeah.
Apparently, personally, at least allegedly.
No, it was a bot. He probably wrote it himself, but it's clearly a bot because of the way it's written under the presumption that he's talking right now. I didn't pull the actual text.
So it was intended to go out during his objection speech, is what you're saying?
Yes, essentially.
The recording I had seen.
Yeah, essentially it says, as we speak, I am on the Senate floor, defending democracy by objecting to. It's basically him saying that, like, I am speaking against this right now.
When they were in lockdown.
But he wasn't speaking. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's...
LOL, no.
Yeah. He didn't type it out while he was there. He clearly had written it earlier. Thinking that
ahead of time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so on Thursday, speaking of just, people being terrible, Missouri Senator Josh Hawley was dropped by Scheinman and Suster.
He lost his book deal.
He lost his book deal. And he tweeted, "This could not be more Orwellian," and it's a direct assault on the First Amendment. And can I just remind everyone about our original First Amendment social media show, which the point is that the First Amendment is about government speech, controlling speech. Like, private companies like Twitter can do what they want. And also, it's just like, all the responses to that are one.
Yeah. And as a Pennsylvanian, I'm particularly offended that he is talking about trying to suppress speech.
Yeah.
He's trying to suppress our votes.
Like literally. So for the listeners, Steph and I live in Pennsylvania, and I'm a judge of election, or I work for the Elections Bureau in the state of Pennsylvania. So Hawley's entire plan literally was to take away our personal votes and to accuse me personally of fraud. Like, that's what he was doing. So yeah, we took it a little personal.
Well, and I think the media piece, though, I think is interesting because it's like, this is the first time that I'm aware of that we're seeing like major media outlets, because social media is different than, for example, news, which was the historical medium of politics, but like still medium, like media outlet. Like, I don't think we've ever really seen a media outlet censor a sitting president at this level, locking them out.
No, yeah, that's
like, so I kind of, I agree that Twitter, like, first of all, Twitter and Facebook, they are private companies. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of their policies, but like in this instance, like I think, one, they're put in a very difficult position because evidence basically suggests that Trump's use of their platforms over the course of his presidency, but specifically in the last several weeks and the last several days, has materially added to this situation. Mm-hmm. So they are, whether by intention or omission, and seems to be by omission, like these platforms and the leaders of these platforms are implicated. Mm-hmm. So I get booting him. On the other hand, I don't know. We're in uncharted territories here. Like, what is the consequence of booting a sitting presidency from a media platform in this way, especially someone for whom I don't want Trump on Twitter because it's I don't want his stream of consciousness to be basically getting being beamed in everyone's phones, inciting the mob. But on the other hand, since he's no longer had access to social media, we don't really know what's going on with the president.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. As we speak, to be like Ted Cruz, my understanding right now is that on Monday, Congress should be introducing articles of impeachment towards him. Who knows what happened Saturday night or Sunday in the world for us? This entire situation's been so rapidly moving. The reason I follow Trump on Twitter, and I cannot recommend this for other people, because people ask me, why do you read this for the last 4 years? I followed him the morning of January 20th, 2017. I sat down and was like, all right, he's about to be inaugurated. And I followed him on Twitter because I felt like I need to know what he's thinking at all times for the next 4 years. I remember saying it to Stephanie while we were watching the inauguration. I need to know. And the nice thing about him is he'll tell me. And now he isn't. And Caitlin Collins is, she's the White House correspondent for CNN. And she said, we don't even know how to do our jobs right now, because one of the things that they do for other presidents, you kind of always stay in touch with the White House press secretary. They're used to, for the last 4 years, they just constantly, all of them follow him on Twitter. And then they just kind of constantly check, because that's how they get the first word of how the president is feeling and what he's thinking. And they've all gotten really good at reading the tea leaves. And she's like, I've been talking to my colleagues and we're all like, what do we do now? I don't know.
Right.
Like he's just, it's
especially
weird.
Because the White House as a whole, and specifically Trump, they're often not on the same page as their communications staff.
Right.
To say the least.
So at this point, he has been banned for life from Twitter. He has been banned for 2 weeks from Facebook and Instagram, which keeps him off their lines until after he's no longer president.
And I believe that they've said publicly that they're considering they're considering an extended ban. I don't believe a lifetime ban has been proper.
Yeah, at least 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I should say. So he's got no outlet right now, which I commend in that they're trying, Twitter's theory here is now he can't incite a riot, but I don't know that he needs to, because now we need to talk about QAnon. Much of what happened on Wednesday is he's got a crazy cult. And I don't use that word lightly. Mm-hmm. There's a cult of people who follow him because they literally believe him to be a messiah. And again, not being figurative and saying they believe he's a chosen one who has been placed in the government to take down the deep state, which includes Republicans and Democrats. These are people who are looking to kill, in their own words, they were looking to kill Mike Pence on Wednesday. They were, they were looking to kill the vice president who works for the president because they believe that Trump is sending them secret messages to. I don't think Trump wants to kill Mike Pence, but I don't know that taking away his ability to tweet harms these people, because they will just make shit up in their craziness and they'll decide that that's right.
Yeah, we didn't talk a lot about the imagery of what happened at the Capitol, but white supremacist symbols, multiple flags, just walking through the halls. A guy had ties, as if he were looking at zip ties. Yes, thank you. Zip ties. They strung up a noose.
Mm-hmm.
Also, which I feel like people who are on any kind of, anything at this point on the internet, probably have also seen, but the other thing that was particularly striking given the year that we've had, and particularly the summer of 2020, was the amount of Blue Lives Matter flags, which are those police, it's the black and blue police flags, as the rioters are clashing with police and security officials. And there's fairly high variability, as Mav noted, in how various security officials, police, whoever's there at the Capitol at this point, because I've lost track of who's there when. Yeah. How they're responding to rioters. We see things there's footage of police appearing to be opening gates for rioters. There's also police clashing violently and getting physically assaulted by rioters. And it's just I think that's kind of exposed. I think Mav and Hannah, we were talking about I think this is kind of exposed what exactly does Blue Lives Matter flag mean anyway. It's this is not, at least in this particular moment, whatever that means to people personally, aside the point, in this particular moment, this has nothing to do with policing. This has to do with something being used as a symbol of white supremacy, of frankly, anti-American, or at least anti-American establishment, symbolism. Because I think that, I too find it funny in the way that the internet has, so a lot of people may not be taking it as seriously as I think it should be, is the amount of people when they were being interviewed that say things this is a revolution, or tomorrow we're bringing our muskets, as if this is 1776 all over again.
And there were a lot of "Don't Tread on Me" 1776 there as well. Also, I know medievalists who study the links between white supremacy and medieval, like misappropriation of like medieval symbols.
Right.
So like I mean like and look at like earlier, well, not this year, it's 2021. I guess this millennium of hell. Look at when Trump decided that he hated the 1619 Project. Mm-hmm. And he decided that we needed to ban critical race theory and we needed to form the 1776 Commission to, not teach people to hate their country. And we should basically we should teach lies rooted in white supremacy about how great America is and during slavery and genocide.
Well, it's about teaching this. I mean, I think the thing that I saw in terms of like the symbolism and like the rhetorical message being crafted, although crafted is maybe, crafted, I would say. I mean, the amount of people that are involved in far right-wing news outlets, I mean, I'm sure a lot of it was crafted. Like, it was merchandised. There were T-shirts. Like, this was not like a fly-by-night, like, spur of the moment, like, hey, we showed up to the Capitol for unrelated reasons and decided to have a riot. Like, this was planned. And I would, and I'm sure at least some of the symbolism and rhetoric was planned to some degree. Although the guy that looks like he's some kind of God of War cosplayer gone wrong confuses me a little bit. So if anyone has insight on exactly what's going on there, like, please enlighten me.
He is.
I believe it's a bit.
Yeah, I don't want to give him too much press. He's the QAnon shaman. He is. It's funny because I follow quite a few right-wing idiots on Facebook and Twitter because I need to know. I need to know what they're thinking as well. And there's this conspiracy theory. It's like, well, see, this guy, he's not really a MAGA guy. This is proof that Antifa has infiltrated us, and Antifa did this. And I was like, no, his name is Jake Angeli. He calls himself the QAnon shaman. He is a well-known figure inside that movement. He is as MAGA as you get. And he is a moron. He's been arrested for being a moron right now. He was taking pictures with Rudy Giuliani a couple weeks ago. He is one of the big movers and shakers inside that movement. And he's a crazy person.
Yeah, I've heard him talk and he sounds like he's schizophrenic.
Yeah, he's crazy.
Like talking about being able to sense like frequencies that regular humans can't.
This is part of the theory behind QAnon.
Oh,
QAnon,
okay.
When I say it's a cult, again, I'm not being derisive towards them. They are a cult of crazy people who believe that Donald Trump is the Messiah sent down to infiltrate the deep state and government and save us all with his magical powers.
And the deep state is also Satanists.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
He's trying to stop these satanic pedophiles with his magical powers. Again, they fundamentally believe
that's really scary. That's so many people believe
and
that.
We have allowed some of them. We've allowed some of them to be elected to Congress. Yes. There are people. So that's who he is. So yeah, that's why he's wearing this thing. He has been, and this is not a joke. He has been this week specifically disavowed by Wiccans and Nordic worshipers because they're like, we don't like we do not like that Nazis are appropriating our symbolism. We do not believe this. Black Lives Matter or something like that. Like, they're crazy. He is literally a crazy person that we should not be giving any more. But like, we have to because he invaded the fucking Capitol.
Right, and he was appears to be one of the people leading the charge. But anyway, what I was talking about, sort of the overall symbolism of the event, is I think for me, I was struck by how much this is like the extreme culmination of rhetoric that we've not only seen from the Trump administration, but even prior to that. I was thinking about like some of the stuff that like in the Sarah Palin era, and like John McCain, which feels like
80 years
lifetimes ago.
Yeah, and so quaint in comparison.
Right, but the rhetoric about like the true America or like the real America, which was often read as a rural-urban divide, and that was often the sense in which it was used. But like we've seen since that period an increasing use of like there are quote unquote real Americans and not real Americans. Real Americans usually meaning white, a certain brand of working class. Basically, the people you saw on the Capitol, like that's.
So let's pause there, though, about working class, because
that's what I say, a certain kind of working class.
Because like a lot of people, when this first began happening, before we really knew what was going on in the Capitol, I was texting people, and someone responded to me, "Oh, this is just a hillbilly riot," and I said,
"No."
I don't think so. I mean, what they had seen is they had not seen the other stuff yet, to be fair to them. But I was like, I challenge the use of the word hillbilly. I challenge rhetoric like from Anderson Cooper, who made the rounds on social media for saying they should go back to Olive Garden and Holiday Inn where they came from, as if Holiday Inn is extremely low class. I don't know. Maybe I just can't afford to stay anywhere. If you look at like there is a thing, an impulse in this country to say that white supremacists and racists, like white supremacist racists, are like poor, ignorant white people, and that's what makes them so. But if you look at the reports of who was there,
yes,
a woman flew in her own private jet, like people who own companies, like Rouse's grocery store. One of the co-owners was at least at Trump's speech. Entertainers, like people, like a lot of people who claim to be cops. These were not.
I think this is where though we need to be careful between distinguishing what the rhetorical presentation is and what the reality is, because I still think that the rhetoric of the like two Americas is because a lot of the Republicans, particularly the far right wing base, is built on a rhetoric of appealing to a particular version of the predominantly male working class. And I will say this, people who identify as working class in a political sense, often when you look at like what the financial definition of working class, what kinds of levels of privilege or precarity are involved in that, are often not working class. I'm speaking from personal experience. I know people who would not identify as like upper middle class or wealthy in terms of like rhetorical presentation, things like that, or even in their own identity, that certainly are.
Yeah, and I want to, this is where, I want to, because we're getting into kind of stuff we do on this show normally now, and I want to talk about this a little bit, and you and your stuff, because this is, so Katya's right. There's, in that class studies, and this is very much in like, in our wheelhouse, is weird in that there's cultural class and there's social class and there's financial class, and people don't necessarily distinguish between them, and yet they are very, very different, right? Mm-hmm. What we're really looking at is a sort of otherism. The reason an Anderson Cooper will say something like that is he's not even trying to be a jerk so much as he's trying to essentially say, these are the bad people, and how can I distinguish the good people from the bad people? Well, they'll do some low-class thing like go to Olive Garden and Holiday Inn, which comes from a particular place of privilege on Anderson's part, but he's really trying to say it's the bad white people.
Which we also actually saw that similar kind of rhetoric used against Trump in the early days of the
absolutely
Trump, where like people were going like, oh, he might be rich, but he's low class in terms of taste. And I'm not defending Trump here or his taste or his well-cooked steaks.
Right.
But like a lot of that, whether intentionally or not, created affinity towards people who feel like they're being like ostracized. Again, not defending them and making them victims, but the people we saw storming the Capitol are people who are like, I always, the whole thing of like people accusing other people of playing the victim card irritates me. But like, this is a moment in which these people like just the entire claim, like the election was stolen from us, is I am the victim and I am standing up for blah, 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 revolution.
They feel aggrieved, right or wrong. And they're wrong, but they feel aggrieved. And that's the thing. So
they might not even be wrong. I mean, since the 80s, Reagan policies have like tried to diminish the working class. So I think they're feeling that, but they are just blaming the wrong source. And Trump is like,
it's a convenience thing. It's the person who was on their side from their point of view. Is it like to their point of view?
Yes, he is.
Right. To zoom out from Trump a little bit, you're looking at the Republican Party. The Republican Party overwhelmingly uses a rhetoric of working class, small business owners, entrepreneurial rhetoric, et cetera, et cetera.
Since the 80s, they've like targeted Black people who are on welfare as a reason to cut taxes. Like, these people do not deserve your tax money. We should basically, as a front, to help the rich get richer.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But by creating that affinity, that kind of picture of that's who they stand for, regardless of, and again, distinguishing between rhetorical presentation and reality, because the reality is that an overwhelming amount of those fiscal policies contribute to the undermining of the working class in the middle, have contributed to the undermining of the working class and the middle class since the 1980s. So they're using that rhetoric to basically create an affinity between people like, let's say, like the average quote unquote working class America. I don't even know what that means anymore. And Donald Trump, who is an extreme one percenter.
Well, it means nothing. And that's sort of the thing. It's only a rhetorical. that I wanted to bring Steph into it is because I mean, like, and we can't totally speak for him, but I would guess, and Steph, you're going to back me up. If you asked your dad what class he was in, your dad would absolutely say he's working class.
Oh yeah.
Her dad, by the way, very, very much a Democrat, very liberal, but he would 100% say that he was a working class person. He's a construction worker. However, he's a construction worker who owns his own company. Again, which is not to say that he is super wealthy. He's not poor, but he's not wealthy either. But I will also say, like, most union construction workers in my family make more money than most tenured professors. Right. And but he's not a construction worker. Sure. He owns a construction. I mean, he is a construction worker, but literally from a class studies point of view, Steph's father is very much from a Marxist, what we study point of view. He is literally bourgeoisie. Like, he owns the company, he owns the means of production. He employs other people. Like, he is now. No one would ever think of him that way because they'd look at him and they'd say, "Here's a dude in a hard hat with some blue jeans on." Like, no one would ever think of him as upper class. From a class studies point of view, he 100% is. He is literally a small business owner. Mm-hmm. Like, that's from his position in the actual economic market, and from a financial sense. Yes. From a cultural affinity sense, he is cultural affinity sense. Yes, he is. And again, this is not to diss on my this is just to describe how these dynamics work. Yeah, but he is well, he wouldn't be a hick, but he's a Yinzer blue collar construction worker. That's how he is viewed by society from a social class stance, because
he also came from a very Catholic family, like a truly like religious family, where he has like very like strong beliefs about not ripping people off. Yeah. That's one of the reasons why he's wealthier, is because he's very fair, like, and that's even an understatement in like how much he charges people. But he comes from like a very religious background. He's very like modest and So it becomes, but he doesn't feel like he deserves like more than like a lot of these people really give me the sense that they feel entitled to more.
But that's what we're saying is more of Steph's dad in the world.
Yes, we do.
Sure, but my point being that he's in a weird space because he would. I mean, and it makes it hard to sort of pigeonhole him, right? Because he is exactly the kind of person that is being targeted by
Trump,
by the current Republican, because he is literally a small business owner. Mm-hmm.
But then again, like, he knows how Trump cheated people like him out of money. But I'm talking about your dad in the abstract, not just your dad, the specific individual. Like, your dad didn't fall for it. No, sure, but it becomes a weird thing, because is your dad working class? Is your dad upper class? Is he middle class? Is he like, what is he? And it depends on the. He just thinks about that so much as he wants people to treat each other fairly.
Right. But I mean,
these demographics are only useful in it's like demographics are kind of like book genres. They're only useful when they're useful. They never capture the totality of what's actually going on, which is why, I mean, this is the issue. And I feel like journalists have gotten better about talking about this when we're looking at like polls, for example. One of the reasons why they're often not really representative of what's going on is because like the way we kind of portion out people according to these demographics is often misleading. And I'm not saying like intentionally they're crafting these surveys to be misleading. It's just that there's no way.
Yeah, you can't capture the complexity of humans. No,
right. And especially in simplified statistics that are something that can be translated to the everyday public. And I'm not saying there's a knock on like the everyday public. It's just like, these are, I mean,
Katya hates people.
Apparently. Well, it's like even I'm somebody that grew up watching C-SPAN, and I think I have I make an effort to be fairly up on news and politics and policy. And if you gave me the nitty gritty, like deep dive data that probably a lot of political scientists and potentially even journalists and government officials are working with, I could get through it, but it would take time. I mean, I think part of the complexity of news reporting, and this is kind of aside from the present issue of what we're talking about right now, but part of the complexity of all this stuff is it's like, it is really difficult to keep track of all of this stuff on such an expert level. We rely on journalists. We rely to some degree even on politicians to kind of translate to us this in a meaningful way. This is why we are a democratic republic, not a direct democracy.
Well, we should. I mean, we theoretically do, but like, and this ties us back to Twitter, right? Do we? Well, we. That's what we say. When we, me, and you guys, we might rely on media to do this. I watch a lot of news, but we as a society in 2020, 2021, we rely on Twitter. I mean, like, honestly, we
Twitter
rely
and
on
Facebook. Most
Twitter
people now
Facebook.
get their
Right.
news from social media, and it's often like
from short bursts. You get your news from.
Yeah.
You don't even read. People don't read articles. We talked about this on the News by Meme episode.
Yeah.
We rely on people giving us news in what can I fit in 240 characters or in a headline. And you can tell.
And when we say
don't actually,
statistically, like significant portions of
the population, yeah,
of the American population,
right, and probably and frankly the world population in a lot of ways. Like that's how information is transferred right now. So that means that you can have misleading things. You have a lot of people just don't read beyond the headline. They're like, oh, this says what I want it to do, so I'll re-forward it, and then whatever gets the most forwards, that's apparently the truth, at least by conjecture. So whatever, or we use it to know, why is it important what Donald Trump says on Twitter or Anderson Cooper says on Twitter, because no one can be bothered to listen to an entire fucking speech of his. So people want to be able to get, let me just get the burst of it in one tweet, right? Like I will say, I think Anderson Cooper, or we were talking before the show, like I think Anderson Cooper apologizes for a lot of the stuff that he says wrong on his show a lot. He understands that he comes from a place of privilege. He understands that he makes mistakes. But like nobody, I mean, I watch his show every night, but most people don't watch his show every night. What happens is when he says something provocative that gets retweeted, that's the only thing that matters, right? That's the consensus reality. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I think people want. People want consensus reality.
Yeah.
I think that boils down to two issues, though. It's like, okay, well, what is the nature of social media and the nature of how journalism is getting paid right now? And Hannah, I know you probably know way more about the nitty gritty of this than I do. But like part of the reason the news has become increasingly clickbaity is because a lot of news outlets now are being paid, like their revenue is dependent on the internet, which is driven by ad revenue, subscriptions, which like you need click through. So as much as we only rely on headlines, they need to write headlines that will entice you to click through, even if it's just to read those first 3 sentences, which impacts I think the form and the quality of journalism, even by publications that are doing their best to deliver quality journalism.
Also, there's paywalls, which there was a tweet that went viral this week that was like, a reporter was like, please read our story. I think it was the Washington Post. And like, don't rely on like bad news sources for this. Someone was like, showed the screenshot of the paywall and was like, well, guess how much it costs to like read something like Breitbart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was just like another kind of maybe semi-topic that I was wondering about is the extent to which Trumpism is due to people's like wanting just a sense of belonging in our society. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you guys talked about like different classifications, like economic and educational and that kind of thing, social, racial. Yeah. And sort of along the lines of educational, I've heard a lot of people say things like that they like kind of making statements about how they feel like they've been put down by people who are on the left, and people on the left have like the sense of superiority.
We call it white anxiety, really. Or white male anxiety, which is kind of in and of itself is kind of pigeonholing in a way that's not necessarily fair, because they're not all male, they're not all white. The problem is, if the left takes a monopoly on the idea of, we're the left, we care about people, not like those assholes on the right. We're the ones helping everybody. We're the ones doing this. Black lives matter. Trans lives matter. If you are suddenly, I'm not going to mention his name. There's a guy that Steph went to high school with that is frankly an idiot, and would post to Facebook, and he would constantly argue with us about stuff like, well, it took me almost a year after college to even find a job, and I'm smart, and I lost many jobs to black people just because they were black. And he says stuff like this, and he doesn't understand that, from his perspective, yes, the world is put upon him, because he doesn't necessarily see the struggles of other people are seeing. he just knows that people are constantly telling him he's privileged, and he doesn't feel privileged.
Yeah, the world is hard.
Yeah, the world is hard, and he doesn't feel privileged. So when he sees an affirmative action program, when he sees a welfare program, and he feels like he's struggling, there's a sense that, whoa, they're not helping me because I am, who's out there to help the white man? And frankly, on our side, on the left, we do poo-poo that a lot more than maybe is fair, which is not to say that we shouldn't poo-poo it. It's to say that that anxiety, there's not always a recognition of that anxiety. I saw a conversation on Facebook of people very, very absolutely upset about the woman who got shot during the Capitol raid. And I saw people arguing, and this is outrageous. They caught this. They would have never shot a Black Lives Matter protester if they went into the Capitol. And these people were serious. Now, they have no idea that Black Lives Matter protesters get shot all the fucking time. Yep. But from their perspective, this woman got shot because she was white. And how do you they're wrong. I get that they're wrong, but their anxiety is real. So how do you combat that? If all the news they get is from Twitter, how do you combat that?
So as far as the question of finding groups and things like that, I don't know if it's necessarily we're at a period where people are more motivated to find their clan, so to speak, than at another point in history, because that's a pretty normal human cultural impulse we see, manifested in different ways throughout all of human history. What I do think is that, and this is something that, again, not recuperating this person, but Trumpism, and Trump is really good at pushing those buttons and that desire to produce in groups and out groups in a way that's motivated by animosity rather than inclusion. And I don't say inclusion in terms of let's have the big tent, et cetera, but so for example, opposing Obama's rhetoric and sort of change, of change and bringing people in, which was big tent rhetoric. But a lot of that was let's make it is about defining an in-group based on a certain set of values. You can argue that in-group was larger in the case of Obama, because that's how you win an election. Whereas Trump, it's about, we're going to delineate what the in-group is by saying what it is not, what is not us, essentially. And that's kind of going back to the true Americans versus not Americans and kind of digging that trench even deeper.
Mm-hmm. Again, look at his first speech of the campaign. I think this is a broad generalization of American history, but both parties have used similar rhetoric about law and order. Mm-hmm. They have preyed on fears of racism. We have our media, symbols that play upon racist fears throughout American history. See Dog with the Wind. And I wonder if this is probably just what everybody else has already said in the 4 years that I just wonder if Trump is just a culmination of a bunch of little and big things.
Absolutely.
Brought to the logical conclusion.
Yeah, people who have been bombarded with that kind of, fear crime, fear, Black people essentially resent Black people, they're taking your money. And it's just sort of this is the logical conclusion to all of that.
I think that 13th on Netflix actually does a pretty good job of laying out how some of that worked in recent history with TV ads and things. If anyone wants to see more of that.
Yeah, it's a great show.
So moving back to Katya's thing, though. So what happens, right? They have removed his Twitter access, which I fundamentally believe this might kill him more so than the impeachment trial, which as this drops, I guess, might or might not have started. I don't know where things have happened in the 48 hours since we recorded this to when the listeners get to hear it.
Congress says that they will start impeachment proceedings on Monday as of this morning.
Right.
That was the plan.
So did that happen?
If the 25th Amendment to remove the president as unfit from office is not pursued over the weekend.
And Pence says he's not going to do that.
Yeah.
And a bunch of cabinet members have resigned, including Betsy DeVos, which can we just pause and say good riddance?
Small mercies. I do want to get to Mav's next point, but I think just highlighting the resignation of cabinet officials and other people, and I believe there's other lower level staff that have also resigned since Wednesday, because it's only been 3 days. God. It is 2 weeks from Biden's inauguration. Mm-hmm. talk about too little too late. Like the writing on the wall, like as we've said, as everyone has been saying, has been on not only for years, but particularly in the last several months in a way that even if you are a true believer in some kind of MAGA thing, like has been undeniable.
Sure.
Like the fact that some version of this, I don't know if we necessarily anticipated this particular event or this particular like level of an event to be happening leading up to the inauguration, but I think we were all kind of collectively bracing for somebody,
right,
or for something to happen, like, or at least anyone who was paying attention. Because I don't think I talked to anyone since Wednesday that is surprised about anything, from breaching the Capitol to the pipe bombs that maybe allegedly be connected that have been found around DC. Like, no one is surprised. And even like journalists who are feigning surprise on mainstream cable television, that does seem feigned to me. Like, I don't think anyone is shocked. And I don't think anyone should be shocked. The only way I feel like you can be shocked is that either you don't understand American electoral politics or national culture, or you have somehow
I think people are shocked in that they're in shock. You know, I think people are in shock about it, but I don't think anybody's really surprised. I think people are like in a world of, how is this reality, right? Like, how is this real life? How did we get here? And I mean, in a lot of ways, I mean, that's what this show is. You know, how did we get here? Well, we're talking about how we got here. Going back to what happened during the Obama versus McCain and Palin kind of point of view, but going beyond that, going back to the Clinton administration and what happened with his trial, that was a big part of it. And that was the left, the Democrats kind of protecting. Now, I will say that what Clinton did was not as dangerous as anything that Trump's done, but that was a closing of ranks and pretending that he did not lie when everyone knew he did, right? Like that was essentially him breaking the rules and the Democrats coalescing around him. And basically the Republicans at that moment, Newt Gingrich said so. The Republicans said, we're going to make you pay for this. Okay, fine. The bets are off. And since then, we've had a division in politics. But then you go back beyond Clinton and you look at like the Reagan era. And then we go behind the Reagan era and you go in the 60s and you look at the civil rights clashes, the Kennedy, the Kennedy versus Nixon, all of this. Like politics have, as we have made the world more inclusive and allowed other people in, we allow Black people to vote. We allow women to vote. We allow Black people to hold office. There was a Black president for 8 years. We allow stuff like that to happen, which in order to spread power to other people necessarily takes power away from the concentration. And yes, if there's a concentration of people,
I have a question. I have a question. So sort of thinking about a couple of the themes that we kind of covered in the last 45 minutes, whatever.
Yeah, no problem.
I guess my question is I think we were talking about the Palin McCain era and all, like, and especially like that cultural history you just kind of like glossed over, Mav. Like, sure. Okay, this is speaking in broad generalities. I'm still thinking this through as I'm saying this. Mm-hmm. I think the left and the Democratic Party, for at least my lifetime, but I think this is true, like of the 20th and 21st century, at least in broad terms, has focused on being like progressive in the sense of always looking towards the future and like what changes can be made to improve.
All paid progressive, yes.
Yes, exactly. And in doing that, it's like it's a future orientation of like, okay, what does America look like now and what incremental improvements can be made to move towards an America that is, more just, more inclusive, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand,
at least prepare for it. I don't know that I'm willing to give the Democratic Party of America the foresight to say that they're specifically trying to move so much as where's the ball going to be? Okay, let's be ready.
I think that's
also, let's not say that the Democrats are all Democrats are the left, because like, as we've talked about in other shows,
sure.
Or even like Joe Biden going on about how like America, this is not who we are. Yes, it is. Like,
yes, it is.
But I think that goes to the point where I feel like if we're just looking at it as a binary, which again I acknowledge is like fully simplified. I think the left has done this thing of like, even in the Biden, like, this is not who we are. The left has focused on a certain kind of progressive, small p progressive, aspirational vision of what America is. Whereas I think, like, for better or worse, the right and the Republican Party, and I think we saw a lot of this in motion on Wednesday, I think has done a much better job of crafting a mythological narrative of America Because I think one of the things I've been thinking about
shining
is
nation on a hill. It's Reagan's thing. The America's a shining nation on a hill.
And I wonder, and this is where the question comes in, is I feel like the left, and even I would include that, like the moderates at this point, because right now we're dealing with a fairly right-wing situation.
The Democratic moderates.
Right.
Sure.
Like, we've kind of ceded the rhetoric of early America and like the revolution, and like for good, and in many cases for good reasons, because it's like, okay, we're distancing ourselves from slavery, we're distancing ourselves from the disenfranchisement of women, people of color, et cetera, et cetera. Like those things, like that distance and that historical awareness is necessary. At the same time, however, I do think that there's something important that has been lost in, or like potentially has been lost in, completely ceding the rhetoric of things like Thomas Paine, George Washington, in this mythological narrative of what America is. Because I think that there's many people, particularly as you get closer, like more and more left on the spectrum, and I would include myself in this, have difficulty identifying with various historical periods in the United States. And I think for people for whom their identity as like Americans of the United States of America, for whom like that history is deeply meaningful, I feel like basically there's a rhetorical ground that has been ceded that I don't know if it was a good idea to cede it entirely.
We didn't when we seeded it, I feel like it wasn't replaced with anything meaningful. Perhaps we could say and there's not been a serious effort, and I feel on the part of just a large majority of Americans to reckon with our history and about why we might have done that. Also, I think goes back to like 1776 commission and is taught in schools and how things are taught. It's patriotism is dangerous, and Benedict Anderson would say that nationalism is a hell of a drug. Well, he would be mad at me for putting him in such a way, but that's basically like his like book, Imagine Communities. It's like nationalism is a hell of a drug. It's the thing that makes you want to fight and die and love your country and see people, and it's imagined through the things we read, our newspapers, our novels, our cultural like rituals, on and on, and
it leads to jingoism.
I think that's right, though, Hannah, is like the idea that like again, a royal we that at this point is very non-specific, but like in doing, we haven't done, I feel like, the historical work for a broader base of people to really have the understanding of like what it means to understand American history, and like particularly all of the really awful parts, and move on from that, because I think that's why we see a lot of divisions that we see, and we have been seeing for the last decade or so, is because like, I mean, I'm thinking of my personal experience, like I know a lot of people in my extended family for whom like there is a particular mythology of America as the greatest country on earth, that if that was taken away from them, or if they felt like that was taken away from them, I don't know if I would go so far as to say destroy their personal identity.
Their cultural identity, though. I mean, it is a
and so I think like
identity that's based on exceptionalism.
Yes.
I mean, I don't believe that, right? When you say, Hannah said, you said that we removed that, the small c conservatism, where the mom and apple pie, if we remove that exceptionalist vision of America and replace it with nothing, it makes me happy, because I don't. But you understand
the historical context for why it's necessary. I think what Hannah and I are saying is that I don't know that for the majority of people that historical consciousness exists.
And you're absolutely correct, because making me like, if you're trying to form a coalition of like-minded people to run a nation, targeting Christopher Maverick is the worst thing that you can do, because I'm not normal, right? I'm a weirdo who thinks about this sort of stuff and has extremely, frankly, fringe viewpoints that are, very, very far left. So like, I'm not the average person. And I don't mean that I'm an exceptional person kind of way. Far from it. I mean that like you're not going to build a big tent if you put me at the center of it. Like that's a bad idea.
You're not the national median, essentially.
Right. So what you want, I mean, if you're going to build a party around, and I'm going to, to bash the left a little bit, performative wokeness, which is something that, makes us happy. If you're going to say
2020 cabinet elections.
Right. And if you're going to say, or even stuff like if you're going to say, we need to reconcile this slavery issue that the nation's been dealing with for the last 400 years, which is what the 1619 Project does. This doesn't, what's the upside of this for someone who hasn't really cared about it, but, just wants to believe that America's great? You're asking them to acknowledge, well, no, America is shitty, and just deal with it. There's no bonus there.
Can I jump in here? I was thinking that I wonder if conservatives and right-wing people are just more likely to internalize what America is and really think of themselves as America, and therefore can't think of anything negative related to America because they take that as a personal affront to them.
You mean America specifically, or do you mean I think everybody internalizes like that. I just think that
I think it's a different it's a different story that's been I'm hesitant to say that culture.
I don't though.
What do you mean?
I don't really think of myself as I've never really thought of myself as America. American hasn't really been a core aspect of my identity.
I think everybody internalizes their identity. I think that there's a generic ideal of America that they are making part of their identity in a way because they it's the reverse causality, because they think of only positive things. They've been only fed that in history class and whatnot, and that becomes their identity as an American, and so forth. They're more resistant to negative aspects.
Yeah. I don't know if it's so much that it's a certain group is more prone to internalizing stories as part of their identity. It's I think we're internalizing very different stories.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's why something like this is not who we are rings hollow to a lot of people for different reasons. It rings hollow to someone like me because I'm look at history and look at how this government treat Native Americans, how it supports slavery, et cetera, et cetera. But someone on the right is actually, no, this is who we are because I identify with American history, which is tied to white nationalism for the very reasons a lot of people don't want to be associated with that kind of nationalism.
And then you end up with this big middle of people who are no, I don't see it this way on either side.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel I saw this, and I probably have said this on another episode because it just really spoke to me. I was on Twitter. It's a dangerous way to begin a story. But someone tweeted 2020. What if 2020 isn't just an anomaly of things that happen? It's just the consequences of long arcs of history coming to roost, whether that be about Trump or the pandemic or how we're dealing with change or capitalism. And I'm yes, actually, this makes a lot of sense. So I feel
that's what history is. Major events don't come out of nowhere. I think that's right.
So we're sitting. I wonder at the wisdom of how this episode will feel in 2 days, much less 2 months, much less 2 years. But we're sitting in the middle of history. So I don't know how it will seem once we get all the facts about what exactly all has happened.
Probably 90% of this will be
but at the same time, since there is a reason none of us were surprised to turn on our TVs and see what we were seeing.
I guess,
and I'm not going to be surprised if things get worse.
Which I guess is the thing is I hate the sentence well, where do we go from here? But also what. I don't know. I can't speculate what the consequences necessarily. I mean, I can, but at least I can speculate about the consequences of Twitter being the social media technology human, as we all are as cultural nerds. But I can't speculate what exactly is going to happen in terms of broad strokes. I do wonder. I think the thing I keep going back to is this question of that I sitting up social media is how do we individually respond to this? And I keep seeing. Again, broad generalization, the camps I see are just basically continue as normal because somehow the inauguration is going to magically fix everything, which I think that's the only position I personally can know at this point. I'm I can't agree with that because I don't think that
he's not
that makes sense.
He's
not going away, and Biden is not a silver bullet. And also these issues are not just attached to Trump, even if somehow magically Trump disappeared into the clouds and just was no longer to influence on people's minds, which is not going to happen.
We call it Trumpism, but that's a misnomer.
The other two responses I keep seeing is either, is we have to somehow reach out to people that can be reached. We're probably not going to reach the QAnon, those people because holy crap. But identifying who we can reach that like among the Trump base and reach out to them and like bring them into the fold. And then, but I'm sympathetic to that because I'm like, I don't, I'm someone who is uncomfortable writing off human beings as unchangeable. But on the other hand, everyone's like, no, they had their chance. Like,
yeah,
let's like basically like screw them. We're going forward and they can just leave. And I'm like, I honestly, at this point, I have great sympathies for both of those approaches. I don't know what's appropriate at this point. I literally have no idea.
This is us being cultural theorists, right? Like cultural studies is my religion and has been for quite a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I sit here and we joke about that one review we got that was like, such a quirky little Marxist show. And I was like, yes, we are, because that's like, it's the one thing that I've been able to attach and believe in. Like the reason nothing surprises me, the reason I predicted a Trump win like a year before, like when he first announced, I'm like, oh my God, he's going to be the next president. And everybody, and people, I lost friends because people were like, stop saying that. That's not funny. And I'm like, I'm not joking. He's going to win. Like, I'm like trying to sound the alarm because I sit here and I watch cultural trends and I break apart stories and I use theory and I go, oh my God, he's got to win because this is just how it's going. And I don't have tea leaves for this. I can understand how an impeachment works. I understand how the fall of a dynasty works. I understand, these are things that I have, but we're in weirdly uncharted territory here. No one's ever been impeached twice. Is he going to be? I don't know. No one's, and moreover, the removal of his Twitter, that's a big deal. Like that fundamentally changes the game on him with 12 days left in his presidency. Holy shit. Like how do you, I don't know anything. I don't have a map for them.
Yeah, because even when I'm like some of the historical precedents people have been raising from U.S. history about that are specifically sort of like fringe groups that decide they're going to do some kind of armed militia-esque riot insurrection through history. Like, even though I think there's lessons to be taken from there, I mean, again, the storming of the Capitol is a thing that hasn't happened in over 100 years.
200.
Yeah, thank you. 200 over 200 years.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, on top of that, it's also like, yeah. But also, like, all of this is happening as both Mav and Hannah have noted, like in a media landscape that no other comparable moment in American history has really taken place in. And I think if there's anything not just the last 4 years, but I think the last like several decades have demonstrated is like the importance that media narratives, I mean, we as cultural theorists always know this, but I think like even to an even greater extent, like political reality is being determined by media narratives. And when I think about it, I mean, it wasn't that long ago. We started having the conversation about alternative facts because of the Trump presidency. And we have seen for the last 4 years, I mean, I wrote a dissertation about this, like the way that like these stories don't need to be based in fact to be functionally real to people. You can act, and this is why I go back constantly to like the importance of ceremony and the importance of mythology, because the way we interpret our everyday lives is dependent on the stories we're telling ourselves all the time about who we are or who we want to be. Those stories don't have to be based in facts. And when they're not, at least tangentially, I think this is where we end up. When those stories are not at least attentive to reality, are not being questioned for their veracity, we're not skeptical about basically our own views. This is the kind of situation we get. It's not just idle, like, oh, I disagree with my uncle at Thanksgiving.
Although, I think that a lot of us have had that kind of situation, or like have seen like little things, and people might wondered, oh, why is it a big deal that like Mississippi had a Confederate flag as its state flag until literally like officially this year? Why do they think that things matter? And little things do build on each other until there's a tipping point, and we just experienced the mother of all tipping points.
Yeah, it's like what you're talking about in Mississippi, or the weird ass uncle at your Thanksgiving. Like, those are pieces of a much larger picture. Like, those things are never isolated. We talk about this show all the time. Culture doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it's not just a bunch of little things happening independently. Like, this is a network of stuff all talking to each other, all influencing each other, all pulling on each other. And when it gets out of hand and it's allowed to escalate without other people pushing back to some kind of mean, we get the ransacking of the Capitol.
So we've resolved nothing.
I mean, it's impossible to resolve anything because
I think we have resolved. I mean, it like not necessarily this episode, but on this show, it's like culture matters.
It's true.
Like this happened because of culture. This happened because of media, and because, in large part, of people not paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
It's people not paying attention to their own media consumption, and I think we're all guilty of this. I mean, we've talked more, I think, in the last 4 years about the way that we end up in our own media bubbles, and we're constantly fed confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Like,
and people not thinking critically.
Exactly. And it's like, I mean, there are other factors that are economic and all these other things, but it's like when I keep going back to this, it's like this happened in large part because cultural narratives went absolutely haywire.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And from a psychological perspective, you can't really blame people because people just tend to think associatively, so that they're bombarded, like you guys have been saying, with cultural information about like America's great and, you know, everything that they've heard all their lives. And so it's much harder in that situation to step back and think, oh, maybe I'm wrong about something.
Well,
Because
how hard is it to remap your entire brain? You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
You're fighting, your natural thought processes.
Well, because once it becomes something that you believe to be reality,
it's really hard to dispute.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that not just with media, like digital media in this moment. We see that throughout human history. I mean, that's like as you're saying stuff like that. That's how brains work.
Mm-hmm.
So we haven't resolved anything, but we have at least established something.
I edit these episodes a lot. I don't know how long this episode ended up being after I truncated it. You know, for us in real time, we shot for 2 hours just now. I don't think I'm going to release a 2-hour episode. So maybe I should. But like, you know, there's just over the last hour and a half, let's say, of everything that we've been going through. Geez, I mean, this is so weird because this is so rapidly evolving that, you know, it's Saturday. This might be all dead and this might make no sense on Monday because things are, you know, culture is moving so rapidly right now that I don't even know for sure that as this drops, Donald Trump is the president. Like, I cannot fundamentally say that for sure, which is a very weird thing it's a very weird moment to be able to say that, like, I cannot without a doubt say who the leader of this country is going to be. And I don't say that, you know, that's not even wishful thinking where it might normally be, oh God, I wish Donald Trump was the president. It's that I cannot 100% say he will be. I actually think he will be, because I don't think that they're going to be able to remove him before he's out. Like but I am, for the very first time, actually very worried of, will he actually leave the White House? He says he will, right? I don't know if there's been another attack on the country or not. And it's like, just because we're talking about literally 48 hours from now, less than, the status quo could have been completely blown up. And, you know, or maybe it's not. Maybe everything that we're saying is still relevant. But like, the world was a very different place on Wednesday for us. So like that's the speed we're moving at right now. And then, you know, the day before, you know, we started this timeline. The reason we went through the timeline was because the changes were happening so quickly this week. And it's just weird. And, you know, the world moved at a breakneck Twitter speed for a week there. And now he's gone from Twitter. So, you know, who knows?
Yep. Speaking of rapidly changing realities.
Yeah.
So anyway,
such a vacuum.
Well, you know what? Normally, I know usually when I always go with the guest and I say, and then you want to plug, and Steph always says no. But, you know, Stephanie, unlike some people on this planet, you have a Twitter account.
Oh, yeah, I guess I do. I use it for only one specific purpose, and that's to complain about our local Haiku show. The questions are terrible.
Yeah, Steph uses Twitter to literally argue with a local game show for high school students. But so
no, it's the host. Just the host.
No, but I mean, you argue at a show. Right.
You know,
but you have a Twitter account.
Yeah.
So, you know, some people are so lucky. Some people aren't allowed to have Twitter accounts. So,
that's true. I feel privileged.
Steph,
I'm surprised they haven't banned me.
So, Steph, anything you want to plug?
No, not really. I mean, like, I don't think they'd be interested in my Twitterings.
Katya, what about you?
Well, if you really want, you can find my Instagram at just that nerd kid. But honestly, if you're going to spend some time on the internet this week, I would encourage you to, one, look at pictures of adorable puppies. And then after you've sufficiently done some brain bleach, call your representatives, donate some money if you're able to a political organization, volunteer your time. This is going to be another very long year.
Yeah.
And I think it only gets better if we actually do something about it, which seems like an obvious statement, but it's what I don't feel like we always follow through on. And I'm definitely guilty of that. So that's my plug.
And palindrome, Hannah.
You know what? You can just keep putting that Feed America food bank information back in the show notes because the pandemic still rages on and $600 checks aren't going to cut it. So I know like there's more immediate things, but Democrats said $2,000 checks if they got the majority. So we should hold them to that.
Yeah.
And it's not nearly enough. So.
Yeah.
Wow. In a better world, talking about $600 versus $2,000 checks could be a whole show. And we didn't even mention that because, like, wow, this has been a week.
So, like, people still need pandemic aid. So, again, while you're talking to your representatives, find them about that as well.
Yeah. And see, now I sound like the bastard. I'm actually going to plug my stuff. I don't have anything altruistic. I just, I need the attention so that I can be the next, apparently world leader. I don't know. Follow me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, all the places, always at Chris Maverick. Traditionally, I'm usually making fun of Donald Trump, but I can't do that anymore because he doesn't have Twitter. So I don't know what I'm tweeting about now because I don't have anything to respond to.
Mav may actually have to tweet something wholesome.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's not going to happen. No, a lot of stuff's about my research and everything as well. And sometimes I just make jokes. So you can follow the show on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, all of the places, always at VoxPopcast. You can follow the show's blog on www.voxpopcast.com, where we talk about, well, not what we're going to be talking about next week. Next week, I believe we've already recorded the show, hopefully, unless the world blows up even further. Next week will be our box office draft show, which is always very fun. But we have some really cool ideas coming up, things that we're going to be talking about on the show, and we love your feedback. So if you go to the blog, you can talk to us about pandemic TV or about sex and superhero comic books. We've got some really interesting shows coming up, and we love your feedback. So please check that out. And if you enjoy the show, we certainly hope you do. Please subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify, or wherever the hell else you get podcasts from, including YouTube. We need more subscribers on our new YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is fun. You can listen to the show, and sometimes, well, probably not this episode, but we have videos and images that sort of go along with whatever we're talking about for an enhanced version. So like and subscribe to us on YouTube because that helps. And leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. That really helps, especially if it's not just a rating. If you write a review, talk about something about the show. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you want to hear more of. Tell us we're a quirky little mark of the show, but, hopefully we can make the world just a little better for you as we try to figure out ourselves. I would like to thank Maximilian of thoughtForm Music for our epic theme song, building ever so more epically and playing us out. Stephanie, thank you for joining us. You're welcome as always.
Thank you again.
I'd like to thank you at home for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.